Imagine a place where the sun is a brutal, unblinking eye, and the horizon shimmers with a heat that distorts reality itself. This was the Ashveil Desert, a vast expanse of rust-colored dunes, cracked earth, and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. It was here, in this unforgiving crucible of heat and dust, that two close friends, Marcus Thorne and Julian Vance, were swallowed whole. They had set out on a simple journey, a shared adventure across the desert's most desolate stretch, but they disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the ghost of their memory and a mystery that would haunt their families for 15 long years. The case went cold, the hopes of their loved ones turned to ash, and the Ashveil Desert held its secret close. It was impossible to fathom. Two men, gone. No car, no footprints, no sign of struggle. They simply ceased to be. Marcus Thorne, a 24-year-old architectural student with an infectious laugh, was the meticulous planner of the duo. He had mapped their route, checked weather patterns, and packed their gear with a precision that bordered on obsession. His friend, Julian Vance, a 23-year-old freelance graphic designer, was the free spirit, the one who brought a sense of spontaneous adventure to Marcus's careful blueprints. They were an unlikely but inseparable pair, bound by a shared passion for the outdoors and a youthful sense of invincibility. Their plan was straightforward, a 6-day journey to a remote canyon known for its rare petroglyphs, a trip they had meticulously planned for months. Their families knew their route, their timeline, and their final destination. This was not a reckless expedition. It was a well-considered trip undertaken by two ordinary, hopeful young men. They were not hardened survivalists or seasoned desert explorers. They were two friends with a car, a map, and a goal. Their journey began on a bright, clear morning, the kind of day that promised nothing but blue skies and open roads. The last time their families heard from them was on the evening of the third day. Julian had sent his sister a brief text message saying they had stopped for the night, were making good time, and everything was going well. Marcus had called his father to report on their progress, mentioning the breathtaking sunsets and the unexpectedly cool evening air. The conversation was brief and unremarkable. Just two friends enjoying a trip. This final point of contact established a clear timeline, placing them deep within the Ashveil Desert, approximately halfway to their destination. From that moment on, the world went silent. When the first alarm was raised, it was a subtle tremor of concern, not a full-blown panic. Julian's sister had expected a text on the evening of the 6th day confirming their return. When it didn't come, she reasoned that a minor delay or a dead phone battery was to blame. A day passed, and then two. The concern grew into a palpable dread. The families contacted local law enforcement, who initially treated it as a delayed return, a common occurrence with travelers in the remote backcountry. But the longer the silence stretched, the more the logical explanations began to crumble. Marcus was not the type to forget to call. Julian would never intentionally cause his family such worry. The initial, quiet search efforts quickly escalated. The search operation was a monumental undertaking. Sheriff's deputies, state police, and a massive network of civilian volunteers descended upon the Ashveil Desert. They used helicopters to survey the vast empty landscapes from above, ground crews with all-terrain vehicles to comb the dusty roads, and search dogs to try and pick up a scent. The desert itself became the primary antagonist in the search, its indifferent expanse swallowing up every lead. The sheer scale of the landscape was overwhelming. It was a sea of sand and stone, a place where a single vehicle could be hidden forever by a shifting dune or a sudden rock slide. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and still there was nothing. No tire tracks leading off the road, no discarded gear, no footprints to follow. It was as if they had been plucked from the face of the earth. Early theories were considered and then systematically dismissed. Had they simply run away? A quick check of their bank accounts and digital activity showed no sign of pre-planning or a sudden departure. Their lives were stable and happy. There was no motive for them to vanish. Had they suffered a simple accident, a vehicle breakdown that left them stranded? This was the most plausible theory, yet it yielded no answers. A thorough aerial survey of their intended route and the surrounding 100 square miles found no sign of their vehicle, a distinct red pickup truck that should have been easy to spot. The search teams were forced to confront the chilling possibility that something more sinister had occurred. But without evidence of foul play, the case remained a missing persons investigation, and the hope of finding them alive began to fade. The first and only significant clue was discovered 2 months after their disappearance. A local rancher, checking his fence line near a remote stretch of the desert, came across an object wedged between 2 large weathered rocks. It was Marcus Thorne's backpack. The discovery reignited the search with a desperate intensity. The backpack was empty, its contents gone, but its presence proved that the 2 friends had been in this specific location. Police and volunteers refocused their efforts, combing the area with renewed vigor. They searched every crevice, every dry wash, and every ASPEN tree for 100 miles in every direction, but the backpack was a dead end. It gave them a location, but no answers. The renewed search yielded nothing more. With no further leads and a dwindling budget, the official search was called off. The case of the 2 missing friends became a cold case file, one of thousands gathering dust in a file cabinet. For Julian and Marcus's families, the decade that followed was a living nightmare, a slow-motion torment of unanswered questions and unfulfilled grief. A full 15 years had passed. The memory of the 2 friends had faded from the local news cycle, becoming a somber legend whispered among old-timers. The red pickup truck was long considered to be buried under a mountain of sand, and the boys were presumed to have perished in the unforgiving desert, victims of a simple, tragic miscalculation. The case was dormant, a solved but unsolved puzzle. It would take a chance discovery by 2 scrap metal collectors to finally expose the grim and unnatural truth. The men, who made a meager living scavenging for abandoned vehicles and old machinery, were in a remote, forgotten section of the desert, far from any established road or trail. They were looking for an abandoned utility tower that had been marked on a defunct map. What they found instead was something far more shocking. Embedded nose first into a towering sand dune was the unmistakable wreckage of a small, 2-seater airplane. It was a bizarre, surreal sight. The plane's fuselage was split open like a discarded can, its wings sheared off. Lying in the sand beside the ruined cockpit were 2 human skeletons, bleached bone against the rust-colored earth. The scrap collectors, stunned, immediately contacted the authorities. The scene was unlike anything law enforcement had ever encountered. The desert, which had kept its secret for so long, had finally surrendered its grim treasure. The forensic team that arrived at the scene was immediately confronted by a series of unsettling paradoxes. The plane itself was an old single-engine aircraft that had been missing for over 30 years. It had no connection to the 2 friends. More chillingly, the skeletons, identified through dental records and DNA analysis as Marcus Thorne and Julian Vance, showed no signs of injuries consistent with a plane crash. The forensic experts conducted a meticulous examination of the skeletal remains, a process that was both clinical and profoundly unsettling. The first, most critical discovery was the condition of the bones. They were intact, with no evidence of the crushing, traumatic injuries one would expect from a high-speed impact. Instead, the forensic anthropologist found something far more insidious. A small, delicate bone in Marcus's throat, the hyoid bone, was fractured. In Julian's case, the bones of his neck and skull showed signs of blunt force trauma, a crushing blow to the back of the head. It was no accident. The young men were not victims of a plane crash or the harsh desert elements. They were murdered. The case was officially reclassified as a double homicide, and the cold case file, thick with dust, was thrown open with a terrifying new urgency. The investigative pivot was immediate and drastic. The old missing persons case was now a murder investigation, and everything had to be re-examined through a new lens. Detectives pored over the original search logs and police reports, looking for anything they might have missed. They reviewed property records for any landowners in the immediate vicinity of the original backpack discovery and the subsequent plane crash site. They focused on a man named Silas Croft, a known loner and eccentric who owned a small, isolated ranch located just a few miles from where Marcus's backpack had been found. Croft had been briefly interviewed during the original search, but was quickly dismissed as harmless. He was a local legend, a secretive man who had lived in the desert for decades, preferring the company of his dogs and his dusty books to people. He was paranoid and had a profound dislike for outsiders, especially those who ventured onto his land. Detectives decided to pay Silas Croft another visit, this time armed with the knowledge that the two friends had been murdered. The property was a dilapidated collection of old sheds and rusting farm equipment, a place frozen in time and caked in a thick layer of desert dust. The man himself was gaunt and nervous, his eyes darting from side to side as he spoke. He claimed to know nothing about the missing men or the plane crash. He was a creature of habit, he explained, and rarely left his property. A search warrant was quickly obtained, and a team of investigators descended upon the ranch. The search was slow and methodical, and it was in the back of an old, locked shed that they found the first piece of irrefutable evidence. Hidden beneath a pile of old canvases and paint cans was a small wooden box. Inside were two items, a battered old camera and a smartphone. The camera belonged to Julian Vance, and the smartphone, its battery long dead, was Marcus Thorne's. The memory card from the camera was recovered, and the photos told a chilling story. The last photos showed Marcus and Julian smiling, a vast desert landscape behind them. The penultimate photo, time-stamped just moments before their disappearance, showed an old man standing in the distance, a rifle slung over his shoulder. It was Silas Croft. The final, blurry photo was a jarring, chaotic image of sand and sky, as if the camera had been dropped in a sudden struggle. The phone's metadata showed it had been powered down manually, not due to a dead battery. Faced with the evidence of his own photos and the location of the phone and camera, Silas Croft's facade crumbled. His confession, delivered with a chilling lack of remorse, was a horrifying account of a trivial motive. He claimed the two young men had trespassed on his land to take pictures of a rare cactus, a specific plant he considered his own. He confronted them, demanding they leave. A verbal altercation ensued. He explained with a shrug that he found their youthful defiance disrespectful, their very presence a violation of his solitude. He described strangling Marcus with a length of rope, and then striking Julian from behind with a shovel. He confessed to dragging their bodies away from his property, and, in a moment of deranged inspiration, stuffing their bodies inside the cockpit of an old, abandoned plane that had crashed on his property decades ago. He then buried the wreckage in a towering dune to hide the crime. He was certain no one would ever find them. The motive was not greed, passion, or some grand conspiracy. It is a tragedy defined by its banal, senseless nature. It is the story of two ordinary young men who set out on a simple adventure and were met not by the indifference of nature, but by the inexplicable, quiet cruelty of another human being. Their final resting place was not a peaceful desert grave, but a wrecked metal shell, a grim tomb in a place no one would ever look. The Ashveil Desert kept it secret until the wind and sand finally shifted enough to reveal a truth so horrific it defied all logic. A cold, hard end to a 15-year mystery.